I thank you very much for waiting. We are now starting the closing session. The moderator of the session is Director Mori or President Mori from IJS. President Mori, please take the floor.
Introduction. We are coming very close to the end of this ISAP. This is the last session. And therefore, we try to sum up or wrap up all the rich discussions we had on two important issues, SDGs and climate change. And for this closing session, we have Dr. Bindu Rohani. He was until recently the Vice President of ADB, and now he has joined ISAP on a part-time basis as the Distinguished Fellow. So, Dr. Rohani, perhaps what I'm going to ask you in this session is perhaps based upon your experience with ADB, the overall observations. Then, before his overall observation, we have two ISAP senior staff members, Dr. Eric Dassman, who has been the leader on SDGs. So I'm going to ask him wrap up of important points regarding SDGs. And the last person is Dr. Kentaro Tamura, and he has been leading climate change related issues in this ISAP session. So first, let me ask Eric to make your kind of a quick summary report to this final plenary. So Eric, please.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mori-san. And it's good to see a lot of familiar faces out in the audience as we approach the end of ISAP. So as many of you experienced, there were 3 sessions during ISAP that dealt with some aspects of the SDGs. There was an opening session where we featured Jeff Sachs, and we gave a broad overview of SDGs. We had a session on national readiness for SDGs, and then this morning my colleague Magnus Bengtsson also was in a session on the linkage between climate change and the SDGs. I'd like to highlight 3 important things that were mentioned during these sessions and sort of provide them as discussion points for Dr. Lohani. I mean, one of the main things that we argued in the opening session was that there's been a lot of emphasis in discussions over MDGs, over what we call the means of implementation, or MOI. And the book project that we recently worked on really highlighted that governance is a significant part of the MOI. It has an impact on finance and technology, which is also considered part of the MOI. And so governance is extremely important and should receive a lot of attention as countries go ahead and move to implement the SDGs. So then the second point is in this connection, when we think a lot about what type of governance will be needed, we also need to think about finance. And one of the things that came through, not directly from our presentations, but from the discussions afterwards, is a lot about how the SDGs are going to be financed and what type of investment that's going to need. And one of the things that I'd like to highlight is some linkage between the governance and finance is the amount of money that it will take to implement the SDGs is a significant portion of funding. And a lot of that money will not necessarily come from new and additional resources, unfortunately. So a lot of this investment is going to have to come from the private sector as well as from national accounts. And so having the right governance arrangements, institutional arrangements in place that can help channel that funding into some of the priorities that are illustrated by the SDGs will be extremely important. This is especially important for climate change, which my colleague Tamura-san will talk about in a little greater detail. But it's also important for other priorities that link over to climate change, especially resiliency and adaptation to climate change. But we can go through many others, water, energy, biodiversity, and what have you. So having the good enabling environment, institutional frameworks in place to channel those resources, that funding, is the second key point. And then the last third key point is one of the things I highlighted during my presentation is when we think about governance, we have seen a shift in the discourse or discussions of governance, moving away from focusing exclusively or primarily on sort of top-down compliance-based governance to a little bit more emphasis on bottom-up collaborative governance. And one of the things that we'd like to do moving forward, that IJUST conducts research on this, and this will be with many of the team members that have presented on SDGs or helped write the book on SDGs, including Simon Olsen and Tetsuro Yoshida and Iko Miyazawa, and many other colleagues at IJUST, is to think about how we can actually operationalize this bottom-up approach and through that actually make the SDGs and the issues that fall under SDGs politically salient. And in this connection, we see the role of civil society organizations being increasingly important. Civil society organizations are sort of key intermediaries between government and business, and perhaps most importantly, key intermediaries between government and mass publics. And as we know through Japanese history, for instance, having strong civil society support, if we go back to the pollution crises during the 1970s, having civil society support of not only environmental organizations, but also non-environmental organizations pushing forward the SDGs can be a very powerful driver of change. And especially if it happens to occur, unfortunately, with some of the sustainability crises that we see appearing throughout Asia, this might make the SDGs not only powerful in terms of their internal logic, but also powerful in terms of their political push for change. So I would like to end there with those 3 points, basically, that governance is important, that we need to think about governance as it influences finance, and when we think about collaborative governance, CSOs or civil society organizations will be increasingly important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. Quite important, a few quite important points regarding SDGs. That's a kind of wrap-up he has made on all sessions regarding SDGs. Next, Tamura-san, could you wrap up various discussions regarding
Thank you very much. Yes, we had several sessions which touched upon this climate change. Starting with our discussion on the future climate regime, institutional design for future climate regime, and also the possible research collaboration between Japan, China, and South Korea. And also we had some sessions on touch upon some technology, low carbon technology, and also role of the city and so on. And also we, for this ISAP, we prepared this flagship report on climate change. So let me just read into some key message of this report, and also I'd like to touch upon some point which have not covered by this report. In this report, basically we we actually made a specific proposal for establishing kind of the so-called cycle for strengthening and nationally determined contribution. So as you know that in lead up to COP21, now many countries submitted their nationally determined contribution. This approach basically in order to ensure the maximum number, universal participation of a country in this new climate regime. But there is some concern that aggregate of this nationally determined contribution probably is not sufficient enough to put global emission on the pathway toward 2-degree goal. So to address this one, we specifically made this institutional proposal on this so-called cycle, for mitigation cycle. And also we recognize the importance of finance, especially in the context of negotiation. This finance component can provide basically two critical roles. One is obviously to provide means and also incentives for developing countries to enhance their action, climate action on the ground. And also provision of finance actually can build a kind of trust and also confidence in the negotiation process, and which help the successful deal of this Paris Agreement. So from that point of view, we also suggest the necessity of establishing cycle for reviewing and strengthening climate finance, and then which should be included in this Paris Agreement. And also we said that the linkage between mitigation cycle and also this finance cycle is very important in terms of strengthening climate action. So this report mainly focuses on this institutional design for this post-2020 agreement. But at the panel discussion and also other session, many speakers pointed out the importance of engagement of wider stakeholders, which include city and business and other civil society organizations. And I think in the previous session also touched upon this, the role of the city. And also we discussed at our session, now we are facing an enormous challenge for transforming fossil fuel dependent society to decarbonize or zero emission society within the next 50 or 60 years. So massive transformation is necessary. So there are some fear or doubt about this feasibility of such transformation. So to alleviate such doubt and also build some confidence, we need success story. So from that angle, city can provide a lot of innovative cases and experience which we can share among ourselves, and then build some confidence for moving toward this zero emission world. So that part, unfortunately, we could not really touch upon this report, but definitely we believe that beyond this Paris Agreement, the role of city is increased, and also we'd like to contribute some, discussion on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So these are quick wrap-up about two important issues we were discussing throughout various sessions of this year's ISAP. Let me perhaps pick up three important points on which I'd like to have overall observations by Dr. Rohani. The first point is about governance. It seemed to me that now the typical top-down compliance-based approach is now shifting more toward bottom-up collaboration-based approach. This is the very big shift in the governance from top-down to bottom-up, from compliance-based to more collaboration amongst various stakeholders. Therefore, countries need to set up this type of governance structure, institutional setup. But this itself is a very big challenge. And therefore, to what extent, for example, developing countries in particular can meet these big governance challenges. This is the first important point, and the point I'd like to have comments from Dr. Rohani. That is the first point. Second point is finance. Yesterday, the first session, Professor Sachs mentioned, commented on the point made by The Economist journal, for SDGs, 4% of world GDP is necessary. And also for climate change, a substantial amount of fund is obviously necessary. But ODA or traditional public funding channels cannot meet this kind of huge financial requirement. And therefore, many participants have pointed out need to get funding from the private sector, sometimes through very innovative financial mechanisms. This is also a very clear point, repeatedly raised in various sessions. But how could we do that? That is still a very big question. And therefore, this is the second point I'd like Dr. Rohani to comment upon. The third one is engagement of multi-stakeholders. That is also a very important point which has been raised by various panelists throughout sessions. Particularly important is the engagement of civil society organizations, communities, and also private sectors. But also important is the cities as well. Their participation is quite critical, as previous session here has been extensively discussing this issue. But for these important stakeholders to be involved, we need to set up some kind of mechanisms by which these important stakeholders can really participate in these important issues. What kind of mechanisms could be considered effective and important? This is a very important question. We have made some suggestions, but still need to be discussed further. So this is the third point I'd like to have the comment by Dr. Rohani. So these 3 points. So please.
Thank you very much. All three very relevant points. First, on the governance, top-down or bottoms-up. Yes, increasingly there have been more and more collaborative solutions have been looked for, and that's essential. To explain this, let me explain. In Philippines, we have a dish called bibingka. Bibingka is a very thick bread. And when I was talking to the last president, one of the presidents, he used to tell me, we need a bibingka approach of governance in this. And I said, what is that, Mr. President? He said, we need the heat from the top and we need the heat from the bottom. That bread doesn't get cooked unless you would have some heat from the top and heat from the bottom. And I think we need a similar kind of governance structure. Everything bottom is also not enough. Everything top is also autocratic. So you're going to have those come in from both sides. And then you got to be pragmatically taking on a case-by-case basis how to do that. So let's think of a bibingka approach as, to me, both top-down and bottoms-up. Second, on the finance, you spoke. I'm looking at you quite a bit on this one, how the financing has been constrained. We all know the kind of negotiation that's been happening. Simple thing is, you have the financing for sustainable development now being discussed, and we've been discussing for some time the financing of the climate change. And if you look at the SDG goals, quite a few are also linked to the climate change. The climate change money, some of them are real. We know about $10.2 billion commitment with $4 billion now available under the GCF. But we heard also the ambassador that yes, we would have something like $100 billion, which has been committed. I think what I hear from the countries where we are working is they like to not hear this, they like to see this. And then one of the things that we may need in COP21 Paris is to be able to has that kind of number say we will provide that kind of money over a period of time. It's really constraining. I give you one example because of the time. Nowadays, it's very normal for organizations like us and others to screen all infrastructure projects on climate proofing requirements or to make them resilient, looking at the disaster. The moment you do that, it takes you into all kind of assessment. That's okay. But eventually then you find out some projects might need some adaptation measures or resilience cost of climate proofing, which could be in some projects of the order of up to 10%. Now, if I'm doing a $300 million project, infrastructure project, 10%, that's about $30 million. And sometimes I have difficulty convincing to the developing country this $30 million should be additional cost you should borrow from me. They said, no, please find me some grant money on this one. That's why you had GCF, that's why you had GEF, that's why the climate discussion. Unfortunately, some of the discussions we hear, and Kaji Ahmed, you mentioned in GCF, it's not going to be grant. It looks like it's going to be loan. So that it's really creating some distortion in the type of discussions. I hope we get it fixed before it becomes too late. That certainly, in my opinion, is important. But Mori-san raised a good point that what's been our experience in getting private sector money? The leverage in the private sector money, on the mitigation side, there have been some, quite a few, because energy efficiency, renewable solar projects, wind projects, clean hydros, yeah, they make return, 13, 14, 15% return. And in some countries, like Thailand, where renewable is very viable because there's a feed-in tariff. So governments have taken some kind of decision to make it possible. Private sector has moved in. No private sector, as you said, Mr. Kaji, has moved into the adaptation side and don't want to because it's all cost, and this is cost which you don't even know. You're all designing all of these under uncertainty. Now look at engineers who design a 1 in 100-year flood. Now I don't know what's going to happen. Whether it's 1 in 100 years or 1 going to be 50. So your way of thinking for future is designing or putting some money for uncertainty. And it's very difficult argument for the private sector to put those kind of money. Having said that, in my view, my personal view, we must be bringing back some form of pricing on carbon. The CDM, those of us who were in Kyoto, Mr. Hamanaka, Mr. Mori, we remember the CDM was a temporary measure. And this has to get away, and we were supposed to be providing technology transfer, technology at affordable rate, and capacity building. I think those two things continue to remain. So I hope the COP22, we will also look at the technology transfer at affordable price. That is also a financing issue, right? And finally, on the engagement of the stakeholder, I think the world has moved on. The public participation is very, very strong. We just need to include. I remember when we was Rio Plus 20, when, never mind, they were telling to those drafters, whether you have a legal agreement or not, whether you sign or not, we're going to take control of this climate change and we'll do on our own. So you are hearing people, stakeholders saying, we're going to do no matter what. I think this is a change, should be taken very seriously. And if they are capable, we can fund them and let them do it. Let everybody be a part of this action, just like every country has to be a part of action on this. And in this case, the cities become exceptionally important. We all know 65% of the Asian will live in cities. 50% of the climate change, the emissions by 2030 would be from Asia. So if we can manage city and make them smart, green, clean, low carbon cities, we're not going to make this to this 2-degree scenario, maybe not even 3. So this is a very critical agenda for which I think we all need to work on this. Let me stop here, Mori-san, because I'm looking at 5 minutes time that you need. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind consideration. And now I think we are very much close to the formal closure of this ISAP as a whole. And this is a quick wrap-up. Perhaps you may have some other important point in your mind, but please take this important point with you and and continue to discuss these important issues in your own country, in Japan, and let's get together again and again. Thank you very much, and please give a big hand to these panelists.
森社長、スピーカーの皆様、どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Mr. Mori, and also the panelists. And in closing the ISAP, I would like to call upon Mr. Hironori Hamanaka, the president of IJUS, to give a closing remark. Mr. Hamanaka, please take the podium. And with this, the 7th International Forum on the sustainable development in Asia and Pacific is coming to a close. And in today and yesterday, about 1,200 people took part. And I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the speakers and panelists and moderators and representing the organizer of this forum. And in this year's ISAP, we have had the very active discussion on the SDG and also climate change. And the discussions took place from the viewpoint, from the global viewpoint, as well as the sub-national and the community level. And many things were shared. And as was mentioned in the earlier discussion in the closing session, these two themes have something in common, which are the importance of the governance, and also, in addition to complying with the top-down decision, but also to combine it with the collaboration with the bottom-up approaches. And so combining the top-down and the bottom-up approaches are crucial. And also, in order to achieve the targets and in order to execute the actions required to achieve the target, how to come about the finance is another very important aspect. And working with the private sector, financial sectors, and also in order to mobilize the finance, carbon pricing is another important policy signals which we expect to see from the government. And with that, the collaboration of the wide range and the diverse entities is very important. And with regards to the SDG and also post-2020 UNFCCC, these milestones decisions will have significant meaning in the future for a very long time. And in order for us to address and also act upon these agreements, we need, as we have known for some time now, it is important to see the activities done by the local governments and non-state actors, and it is of increasing importance. And all these willing parties need to play their fullest roles from their own positions and beyond the roles and differences. And they will work in a partnership and work in collaboration. And with regards to the diversifying actors in Asian cities, these cities are growing, and urgent need is in the infrastructure and consolidation, as well as the forming of the low carbon and the sustainable cities. And in that, they need to address the diminishing population, aging, and also the making of the compact cities and vitalization of the local economy, etc. And this would require the effective and efficient response to the demand for the infrastructure. And we need to strive to share the good practices in addressing these issues. And this should represent the powerful pathways to achieve the low carbon, resilient, and also the conclusive society across the world. And as have been discussed by many, this year is going to be the milestone year in terms of the SDG. We would require the better, more improved governance, and also it is necessary for a number of different actors to play their own roles by way of exchanging opinions from the different viewpoints and to establish the continued partnership through collaboration and cooperation. And through the practical policy research, IGES aims to transfer the society to the sustainable one, and through the enhancement of these partnerships, we would like to move forward, see the progress forward for the more progressive and the pragmatic solutions. And so we have the major. We need a major plan to accommodate these necessary changes, and I just shall strive to make a meaningful contribution in the process as a change agent, and we would like to call upon the continued support and opinions and the cooperation so that we can reflect those inputs in our research activities so that we can give out the valuable opinions towards the solutions and suggestions. And would like to ask you for your continued cooperation. And in closing, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for the past 2 days for the active discussion and your cooperation. And thank you very much for all the participation and cooperation. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamanaka. And this concludes the ISAP 2015, the 7th Conference International Forum on the sustainable Asian Pacific. And thank you very much on behalf of the organizers.